On a bright morning in 1945, the sea was calm, the sky open and clear. A massive battleship prepared to leave the harbor, its steel hull glinting under the sun. Among the crew, one sailor stood at the railing, his hands slowly lifting in a wave toward the shore. His smile was faint, almost as if he knew something no one else did. It would be the last time anyone saw him alive. Within days, the ship he sailed on would vanish without a trace. No wreckage, no survivors, no answers. And to this day, no one truly knows why. William Carter was just 22. But he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life staring down the vastness of the ocean. Born in a small coastal town in Maine, he grew up where the cries of seagulls and the tang of saltwater filled the air from dawn to dusk. His father, a shipbuilder, had died when Will was only 9, leaving him to step into the role of the man of the house far too soon. He would spend hours at the docks, leaning on the splintered railings, watching freighters and naval destroyers disappear over the horizon. In his boyhood daydreams, he saw himself aboard those vessels, his name etched into the story of the sea. To Will, the Navy wasn't just a career, it was a calling. It was where adventure, duty, and honor converged into one unshakable dream. By the summer of 1943, the world was at war, and the Pacific was a place of both heroics and horrors. Newspapers carried headlines of fierce battles in places most Americans had never heard of, and every few weeks, the town received the grim news that another young man would not be coming home. Will had just finished his apprenticeship at the local shipyard when the decision was made. He enlisted in the United States Navy. Friends said he barely hesitated. His mother said he didn't hesitate at all. There was a spark in his eyes when he signed the papers, the same spark he had as a boy watching ships leave the harbor. To him, the war wasn't something to fear, but something to face. It was his chance to serve, to protect, and perhaps to prove himself. Will's departure was a scene the whole town seemed to witness. The morning air was cool, the sky a perfect blue, and the massive battleship towered over the wooden pier like a floating fortress. His mother stood in a neat coat, holding a folded handkerchief she never used, her lips pressed into a trembling smile. Beside her was his younger sister, Clara, clutching his arm as if she could hold him there by sheer will. And then there was Evelyn, the girl he planned to marry, her dark hair pinned back, eyes shimmering with pride and worry. She pressed a small envelope into his palm, whispering that he was only allowed to open it once they were at sea. Will promised he would. As the ship's horn echoed through the harbor, he waved one last time. That wave would stay in their memories forever. In letters that arrived over the next 2 years, Will described the sea as a living thing, calm one day, vengeful the next. He spoke of shipmates from all over the country, men who became brothers in the close quarters of the lower decks. He wrote about long, sleepless nights under starlit skies and the eerie silence before a storm. His words were steady, his tone always hopeful, and though he admitted to seeing things no one should have to see, he never once hinted at fear. To his family, those letters were proof that he would return. They pictured him walking back up that same pier, duffel bag over his shoulder, grinning as though nothing had changed. They thought he'd be back by Christmas. Everyone did. The war was turning. Rumors of an end swirled through the newspapers, and the mood in the town began to lift. His mother started mending his old winter coat, just in case. Evelyn began planning a spring wedding, her dress folded neatly in a box under her bed. Clara told her school friends that her big brother would be home any day now. But Christmas came and went. January passed, then February, and with each passing tide, the harbor remained empty, the horizon bare. The only thing that returned to them was silence. A silence so deep it began to feel like the sea itself was keeping a secret. The ship that carried William Carter into history was the USS Valkyrie, a Cleveland-class light cruiser built for speed, endurance, and striking power. At over 600 feet long, with 12 6-inch guns lining her deck and anti-aircraft batteries bristling from every angle, she was a warship designed to fight her way through the deadliest waters on Earth. Her gray steel frame cut through the ocean with the grace of a predator, and in the eyes of those who served aboard her, she was as much a home as she was a fortress. Commissioned in 1943, the Valkyrie had already seen combat in the Solomon Islands, escorting carriers and pounding enemy shore positions. But by the summer of 1945, she was being prepared for something different, a mission that was neither entirely routine nor entirely clear to those aboard. Officially, the orders were simple. Transport a classified cargo to an Allied forward base in the Philippine Sea, then join an escort group bound for Okinawa. The crew was told the cargo consisted of sealed containers and vital supplies, but there was something about the way the officers spoke in clipped tones and kept the hold under lock and key that made men whisper behind closed doors. Some said it was just medical equipment. Others swore it was something far more dangerous. Whatever the truth, it wasn't the kind of thing anyone dared to ask too many questions about. In wartime, curiosity could be as deadly as a bullet. The final port call before their departure was at Pearl Harbor, where the Valkyrie spent 3 days resupplying and taking on fuel. The men roamed the docks in their Liberty Whites, catching the last hours of solid ground before the long stretch ahead. Some wrote letters in cramped handwriting. Others drank and laughed in the crowded bars along the waterfront. The harbor air carried the mixed scent of salt and diesel, a reminder that the ocean, vast and unforgiving, waited just beyond the breakwater. When departure morning came, the crew filed aboard in the soft light of dawn, their shadows stretching long across the wooden planks. The Valkyrie's engines rumbled to life, a deep, steady vibration that could be felt in the bones. Among the crew, morale was cautiously high. Most believed the war was entering its final phase, and rumors swirled that Japan might surrender within months. The men spoke about going home, about the girls they would marry, the jobs they would take, the lives they would rebuild from the ashes. Will Carter was no different. He carried Evelyn's unopened letter in his breast pocket, intending to read it halfway through the voyage, a quiet tradition he'd made for himself. He laughed with his shipmates, shared cigarettes on the deck, and leaned over the railing one last time to wave to the faces on the shore. It was a wave no one forgot. The weather that morning was deceptively calm. The sun rose in a clean, cloudless sky, casting sharp reflections across the still harbor waters. Naval meteorologists noted only a slight chance of scattered squalls farther west, nothing unusual for that time of year. The Valkyrie slipped her moorings and began her slow turn toward open sea, her hull slicing through the gentle swells like a blade through silk. It was the kind of departure that gave no hint of danger. No storm clouds on the horizon, no shadow of an enemy ship, nothing but the endless blue ahead. The men on deck stood easy, joking and smoking as the coastline faded into a distant line. No one aboard knew they were taking part in the Valkyrie's final voyage. No one could have guessed that in just a matter of days, the cruiser would disappear entirely, swallowed by the same waters she had ruled for 2 years. Whatever happened out there left no wreckage on the surface, no distress call that reached friendly ears. The sea would take her, whole and silent, and the only trace left would be the memories of those who had watched her leave. The morning the USS Valkyrie left Pearl Harbor was etched into the minds of those who worked the docks. Harbor workers remembered the cruiser's long, sleek frame gliding past them, sunlight glancing off her steel hull. The deep thrum of her engines seemed to linger in the air long after she had passed. One man, a crane operator named Samuel Reyes, swore he'd never forget a single face from that morning, especially the young sailor leaning over the portside railing. He described him as calm, almost serene, his hand raised in a slow, deliberate wave. It wasn't the quick, cheerful gesture of someone leaving for a short trip. It was something else, something heavier. For reasons he couldn't explain, that wave haunted Samuel for the rest of his life. In the first days at sea, the Valkyrie sent routine radio messages to Naval Command. Position reports came through on time, clear and precise, each confirming she was on course and making steady speed toward her destination. The weather was fair, the crew in good spirits. Supply manifests were checked and confirmed, and minor engine maintenance was noted without concern. To the officers receiving these transmissions, the Valkyrie was just another ship on another mission. There was nothing to suggest that anything unusual was about to happen. On the third day, a final routine transmission was logged at 1900 hours. It was brief, almost perfunctory. Position update, weather report, fuel levels, all within normal limits. The radio operator on the receiving end described it as businesslike and uneventful. But after that moment, there was nothing. No further position updates. No distress calls. No static bursts hinting at a damaged transmitter. The Valkyrie's voice simply vanished from the airwaves, as though she had sailed beyond the reach of both man and machine. In the days that followed, other vessels in the area were contacted to see if they had sighted her. A few merchant ships reported seeing a silhouette on the horizon that might have been a light cruiser, but none could confirm it was the Valkyrie. One fishing boat claimed to have spotted a large warship sitting motionless in the distance just before dawn, but by the time they altered course to investigate, it had disappeared. Whether it was her or not, no one could say for sure. Each report was logged, but none provided a concrete lead. Somewhere beyond the horizon, something happened. What exactly it was, a sudden storm, an attack, an accident, remained buried in secrecy and speculation. But those who had seen her leave could never reconcile the image of that proud, unshakable warship with the reality that she had simply ceased to exist. The wave of that young sailor still played in Samuel Reyes's mind. As though it had been a farewell he was never meant to understand until it was far too late. When the USS Valkyrie failed to arrive at her destination, the Navy launched an immediate investigation. Search planes crisscrossed her projected route for days, scanning the endless blue for any trace of oil, debris, or life rafts. Not a single scrap was found. For those who had seen her off, this made no sense. Ships didn't just disappear. But in the absence of evidence, the theories began to multiply, each one more unsettling than the last. Sailors, naval historians, and even conspiracy-minded civilians offered explanations, none of which could be proven, but all of which carried a grim plausibility. The first and most widely accepted theory was enemy attack. In mid-1945, Japanese submarine activity in the Pacific was still deadly, even as the tide of war shifted. Records show at least 2 enemy submarines were operating within 500 miles of the Valkyrie's route during the time of her disappearance. An experienced submarine captain could have shadowed her for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A well-placed torpedo to her ammunition magazine could have caused an explosion so violent that the ship went down in minutes, leaving little to no wreckage. Such a hit could have been quick enough to prevent even a distress signal. The absence of survivors would fit this theory, but without physical evidence, it remained speculation. The second theory pointed to the wrath of the Pacific itself. The waters west of the Philippines are notorious for sudden, violent storms that can rise without warning. Typhoon season in 1945 was particularly vicious, and several vessels were lost to monstrous waves that year. Some believed the Valkyrie sailed into the path of a sudden Pacific typhoon, the kind where swells can reach 50 feet and winds scream like a living thing. Even a ship as large as the Valkyrie could be overwhelmed, capsizing in the chaos. In such a scenario, the ocean could have swallowed her whole, dragging her to the depths before the crew had a chance to signal. But again, no floating debris was ever found. And storms, no matter how fierce, usually leave something behind. A third explanation focused inward: mechanical failure. The Valkyrie's class of cruiser had a history of boiler room incidents, and her own service record showed repeated repairs to her propulsion system. A catastrophic boiler explosion deep within the ship could have triggered a chain reaction, rupturing fuel lines, igniting ammunition storage, and sending the vessel to the bottom within minutes. Survivors in such an event would be few, if any. Fires of that magnitude were known to melt steel and obliterate lifeboats before they could be launched. But mechanical failures tend to leave evidence, and the absence of wreckage still gnawed at the edges of this theory. Then there was the most whispered explanation: the classified mission. Some veterans claimed the Valkyrie's cargo was not medical equipment or supplies, but something far more dangerous. Rumors spoke of experimental weaponry, intelligence documents, or even prisoners whose existence could never be acknowledged. If her true orders were off the record, her disappearance might not have been an accident at all. There are those who believe the Valkyrie was deliberately erased from official logs, her loss buried under layers of secrecy. In this version of events, the lack of search results wasn't a failure, it was intentional. The truth, if there was one, would remain locked away in classified files that may never see daylight. The final and most chilling theory was the one no official report would ever acknowledge: the paranormal. Sailors have long told stories of cursed waters, stretches of ocean where compasses spin wildly, radios go dead, and ships vanish without explanation. Old fishing families in the Philippines spoke of ghost ships gliding silently across the horizon, manned by figures that never moved. In the weeks after the Valkyrie's disappearance, at least 3 fishing boats reported seeing strange lights far out to sea, glowing orbs that danced just above the waves before winking out. Some swore they saw the outline of a warship drifting in the moonlight, silent and empty, as if crewed by shadows. The Navy dismissed these claims as superstition, but the stories persisted, passed down in quiet whispers in dockside bars. Each theory had its believers and its skeptics. Each held enough fragments of truth to seem possible, but none could close the case. Without wreckage, without survivors, without even a single confirmed sighting, the Valkyrie's fate remained a riddle written in salt water. For the families left behind, the not knowing was worse than any single explanation. And for men like Samuel Reyes, who could still see the image of that lone sailor waving, the unanswered question was almost unbearable. The truth was locked beneath thousands of meters of ocean, but rumors refused to die. For weeks after the USS Valkyrie vanished, William Carter's mother kept walking down to the docks every morning. She would stand at the edge of the pier, her coat pulled tight against the wind, scanning the horizon as if sheer willpower might make the ship reappear. At first, neighbors thought it was an act of hope. But as days became weeks, and weeks turned into months, they began to see the truth. She wasn't expecting the ship anymore. She was expecting something. Maybe a lifeboat. Maybe a survivor clinging to driftwood. Maybe her son, walking toward her through the mist. But every morning, the horizon stayed empty, and the only sound was the gulls crying overhead. Evelyn, his fiancée, had a different ritual. She kept his photograph on the bedside table, right where she could see it when she woke and before she slept. In the picture, Will was in his navy whites, smiling faintly, his cap tilted just so. She spoke to him sometimes in whispers, telling him about the garden, about Clara, about the things she would have told him in her letters if he were still writing back. She refused to move the wedding dress from the box under her bed. She told herself she'd keep it there until she knew for sure. That knowing never came. The Navy's telegram arrived in late spring. It was short, written in the stiff, cold language of military formality. Missing, presumed lost. No survivors reported. There was no comfort in it, no explanation, just a final line that closed a door in the minds of those who loved him. The town had seen these telegrams before, but each time one arrived, it felt like the world dimmed a little. People tried to comfort the Carters, bringing food, speaking softly, avoiding questions. But there are some wounds you can't touch without making them worse. The hardest part wasn't just losing him, it was the absence of proof. There was no body to bury, no grave to visit, no last possession to hold on to. Just a handful of letters, a uniform folded neatly in a drawer, and memories that grew sharper in the silence. For his mother, grief was a constant companion. For Evelyn, it was a shadow that followed her even on sunny days. For Clara, it was a confusion she couldn't put into words. How could someone be gone if they had never been found? And yet, not everyone believed they were truly gone. In the years that followed, stories began to surface. Whispers of sightings in distant ports, of men in faded Navy uniforms walking alone along foreign docks. Some claimed they saw faces they recognized, older, leaner, but unmistakable. One fisherman swore he'd met a man in the South Pacific who introduced himself as William, then vanished the next day. Most dismissed these as false hope or mistaken identity. But some families swore they saw their boys years later. In the summer of 1947, 2 years after the USS Valkyrie's disappearance, a British merchant vessel named the Arcadia Star reported something unusual while crossing a remote stretch of the Pacific. At dawn, through a thin layer of mist, the crew spotted a large warship drifting aimlessly. Her gray hull was streaked with rust, her flags tattered, and her guns unmanned. As they drew closer, it became clear that no one was on deck. The Arcadia Star's captain ordered the engines slowed, but before they could approach within hailing distance, a wall of fog rolled in. When the fog lifted, the warship was gone. Official records listed the incident as a misidentification, but several crewmen swore the silhouette matched a Cleveland-class cruiser, the same class as the Valkyrie. 5 years later, in 1952, another account surfaced. This one from a solitary fisherman working among the reefs of a remote island chain in Micronesia. Early one morning, as the sun burned away the night mist, he saw a lone figure standing on a high cliff overlooking the sea. The man was tall, dressed in a faded Navy uniform that looked decades out of date. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate wave, the same kind of wave you might give someone you were leaving behind forever. The fisherman blinked, and the figure was gone. He searched the cliff for hours but found no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. These reports, like all others, were quickly dismissed by authorities. The official stance was that wartime wrecks and uniforms were common in the Pacific, and that witnesses were often mistaken or misled by the tricks of light and weather. But sailors and fishermen have long memories, and the details of these sightings were too precise to ignore. Some swore the uniform described by the fisherman matched the Valkyrie's service colors exactly. Others claimed the merchant cruise warship sighting had been quietly noted by naval intelligence, then buried in files marked classified. Over the years, more whispers emerged. A cargo plane reported seeing an unlit ship moving against the wind at impossible speed. A diver exploring a wreck near the Mariana Trench said he felt the presence of someone watching him from the shadows of the ocean floor. None of these accounts could be proven. None of them could be disproven. And in every telling, one image returned again and again. A solitary man, in an old Navy uniform, raising his hand in that slow, final wave. Could the sailor still be out there? Somewhere? It wasn't until the late 1980s, more than 40 years after the Valkyrie vanished, that her story resurfaced in a way no one could ignore. A deep-sea exploration team, working with advanced submersibles, was mapping the seafloor in a trench nearly 3 miles down. Their mission had nothing to do with the war. They were charting geological features for scientific study. But during one of the dives, the pilot's sonar picked up an unnatural shape resting on the ocean floor. At first, it was just a shadow on the screen, but as the submersible drew closer, the outline became unmistakable. The skeletal remains of a warship, her hull twisted and torn, her guns silent for half a century. When the lights swept over the wreck, there was no doubt. The faded number markings along the bow matched the Valkyrie exactly. The nameplate was corroded but still legible, the letters faint under decades of salt and pressure. Her superstructure lay in ruins, bent and broken as if by some enormous force. Yet the way the damage was concentrated baffled the team. It didn't look like torpedo impact. It didn't look like storm destruction. Whatever had happened to her was sudden, violent, and unlike anything the experts had seen before. The submersible's cameras recorded every detail. The main deck partially collapsed, railings twisted like wire, hatch doors wrenched from their hinges. There was no sign of life, no bones, no remnants of the crew. Just the silent steel shell, entombed in the cold dark. Silt clung to her like a shroud, and strange deep-sea creatures slithered through her empty corridors. In the crew quarters, a few personal items still lay scattered. A corroded compass, a mug encrusted with barnacles, a faded pack of playing cards fused together by rust. Then came the artifacts that hit closer to home. From the bridge area, a diver-operated arm retrieved a pocket watch. Its glass cracked, but its hands forever frozen at 2:17. In another compartment, a rusted dog tag was found wedged in a gap between steel beams. The name etched into it was still legible, William Carter. It was the first confirmed trace of the young sailor in over 4 decades. But the most unsettling discovery came from a small, sealed container found in what remained of the ship's photo lab. Inside, remarkably preserved from the deep, was a camera. The film inside was degraded but not destroyed. Once developed, it revealed a series of mundane shots. Crew members on deck, a sunset over calm seas, sailors laughing beside the massive guns. But the last frame was different. It showed William Carter, standing alone in his uniform, raising his hand in that same slow wave. Behind him was not the deck of the Valkyrie, nor any visible ship at all, just endless ocean stretching to the horizon. How or when the photograph had been taken was impossible to say. Experts claimed it might be an optical illusion or damage to the film. Others weren't so sure. The image sparked new questions that no one could answer. If the camera had been aboard when the Valkyrie went down, how had this final photograph been taken miles from any vessel? And if it wasn't taken before the ship's disappearance, then when? We may have found where the Valkyrie sleeps, 3 miles beneath the surface, but the ocean still keeps her secrets. No record explains the force that tore her apart. No testimony tells us what happened beyond the horizon. The wreck is silent, yet the questions remain, heavier than the steel that holds her. The artifacts lie in museums now, the pocket watch, the dog tag, the corroded compass, but they give no answers, only reminders. Families have photographs, faded letters, and the official word: missing, presumed lost. For the Navy, the case is closed. For the ocean, it never was. And still, stories drift in with the tide. Fishermen, far from shore, speak of a lone figure in a Navy uniform, standing atop the waves as if the sea itself were solid ground. His arm lifts slowly, and he waves. Declared lost at sea, 1945. Crew, 312. Survivors, 0. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still and the water is black, you might see him too. A shadow against the moonlit waves waving, waiting.